What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of JaAR. JaAR, for those of you that may be new, stands for Joe.
And Amy.
Review. This is our weekly show where we review the Magic stories. And we are here to continue our review of the Innistrad Midnight Hunt stories. This week we are back with the main stories as we have been trading off as these stories are released in that order. We are here for episode 4 of 5, Harvesttide, once again by K. Arsenal Rivera. My quick review at the top of this one, and I think we're going to be somewhat in agreement on this one. This story was spectacular. You should go read it. We're not really, well, yeah, sorry. This story was spectacular and you should go read it. Period. That's my short review. What about you?
My short review
or quick review, whatever you want to call it. Whatever we call it on this show.
That, not only is this story important to the scheme of these stories from a canonical standpoint, but it's also important for just people to read.
To understand things, and we'll get into it, but yeah, that's fair. I agree with that. Yeah, so definitely go check this story out. Hey, if you're interested, if you were unaware, to remove as many barriers as possible from you being able to find this story, the top link in the description down below will take you to this story and you can read it for yourself right there. So please feel free to do that, and then of course, if you haven't already, and then of course, we would love it if you would come back here and join us so that you can continue in the conversation in the comments down below. We would love to hear your thoughts. That's kind of the idea. Is, like I said, keep the conversation going with us and your fellow commenters as well. So, before we get to the full review itself, hi, welcome to Geek for All. As we said, Joe, Amy, nice to meet you. Please feel free, if you have not already, to subscribe and ring that bell so that you will get notifications whenever any of our videos come out, including more of JaAR. When we go into Crimson Vow, we'll be doing those stories as well. We'll be finishing up these, of course, over the next few weeks. We have live streams every Monday and Friday, 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on this channel. Mondays, for Magic fans, we play Magic the Gathering Arena. Usually limited play, but not exclusively necessarily. And then on Fridays, random video games. This Friday, we will be continuing, possibly finishing, our spooky month of streams with Outlast, or continuation of Outlast. So definitely stay tuned for that. We hope that you enjoy.
Yes.
But on to the full review itself. I thought that the start of this story, which I had almost forgotten about. In fact, if I hadn't written this down, I might have forgotten to talk about it. That section with Olivia and the messenger was so cool. You get, because we haven't heard a lot from the vampires. We've heard a lot about vampires in these stories so far, that they're awful and, like, you know, that they're terrible and all these things that they've done that are awful. But that moment where Olivia is wearing the face of the maiden that she cut off and has laid over her own face to absorb the blood of the maiden to, like, keep herself young, I suppose. It's like...
Well, to give her skin some color. Because she doesn't have any. Because she's a vampire. Yeah, and she said that, or it said at the end of that section, that she, like, when she took the face skin off of her face, she rubbed the blood into her thirsty skin. Just wear some makeup. I mean, God.
So gross. So awesome, but so gross. She was also soaking in a literal bloodbath. We could talk about that. And
I feel like that's more of like a rich person thing. Like
definitely.
I'm swimming in money, you know, or milk, you know, because of the... It's helping my skin. Oh, I actually took it even further than that. Is that, you know, there's the, whether it's an urban legend or not, there's those stories of rich people, like, getting the blood of the young and, like, either drinking it or injecting it or whatever the myth, likely a myth, hopefully a myth, is that you, like, that's what keeps you young, is that you get, like, blood from young people. She's a vampire. She doesn't need...
But she has it. but she got it from a maiden. It's specified that it was a maiden. That's why
I'm just saying, like,
I agree.
If that's for immortality, she's already there.
I know.
She doesn't need it.
Yeah, that's what I, kind of looked at, was like, it was a maiden. That's what it reminded me of, at least. I also appreciated that there was that little nod to, I believe it was a nod to an earlier story, but maybe not, where they talked about the messenger. They talked about, one of the earlier stories talked about the vampire who, like, hid among the villagers. He, like, was a traveler, and he showed up to the village, and then late one night just murders someone and then leaves, and all the villagers were, like, pissed off that he had hidden himself among them. And then this messenger mentions that he was hiding among the humans as his whatever persona that he was, his, like, hunter or whatever persona. And then it said something about, got info from a kind woman. He, like, called her a kind woman, and then thanked her by killing her on the spot, right where she stood, and then burning her effigy, or the effigy.
Well, he thanked her and then murdered her.
Is that what it was? Yes. I thought it was he thanked her by killing her where she stood.
No, he thanked her while murdering her.
There you go. So she felt some gratitude right before
she didn't.
She was murdered.
She didn't.
Yep. So good. So good. That moment of just the two of them just being ridiculous. It hopefully gives us an indication of what is to come when we get to Crimson Vow.
Yes.
Very much. If it's more of that, I'm all in. All in, by the way. Super, super happy with that. There's the foreshadowing moment because Olivia finds out about the Gatewatch and the Moonsilver Key. And she kind of uses the Socratic method of, like, and what would you do in this situation? He's like, this. And trust me, as somebody who went to school where they used the Socratic method, I've been this dude where, like, you answer the question, you're like, I think this is the answer that you want. And then it's definitely not. And they just give you a different answer and then ask you another question. And you're like, okay, I can do this. I messed up the first time. This is the answer that you want. No, it's not. No, it's not. Oh, okay. Well, I tried. I'm sorry. I tried. So like I said, I've been this dude before, and so I feel your pain. But she mentions that, what the Gatewatch are doing with the Moonsilver Key and working with the Celestis. She knows about the Celestis because all he said was something about the Moonsilver Key, and she goes, oh, they're using that old thing. Or they're going to that, or whatever. So
they're desperate enough to use that archaic thing.
Right. So she's aware of it, and is now saying, like, okay, well, and says to him something to the effect of, you don't kill them now when they're doing what you already want them to do. And now you and I kind of talked about that.
Yeah, because I was like, she wants them to bring back day?
Right, like the balance to day and night. And my point was, presumably, she just wants eternal night. And if the Celestis can bring the balance to day and night, it presumably can also sway it in one direction or the other, and so maybe that's what she wants.
Right.
It wasn't what she wanted until she heard that they had it.
Right.
Because she was like, oh, they're using that. Like, anyway, so I guess. Although, I mean, it was moving in that direction anyway, and like with the Harvesttide Festival, they were trying to bring balance to it so that it wouldn't, like the night wouldn't overtake it. So maybe that's just what Olivia was getting at, is that like they were attempting to disrupt that. And if it works, that's a problem, but if it doesn't, she can at least show up, stop them, and then make it eternal night for herself as she pleases.
Yeah, but then she can do it without that thing, seemingly.
Well, whatever.
Who knows?
I'm not sure. But, okay. Then there was a section that I wanted to talk about before we get to the big discussion here.
Okay.
There's a section that I wanted to talk about. You know this. There was an Arlen, the first Arlen section of the story before we get to the line denoting like a passage of time as opposed to a change in perspective. And in that Arlen section, it's like it ends with the wolves and the werewolves showing up at the festival. So it's that section where Arlen is like noticing the festival and seeing all these different aspects of it. And it ends with her noticing that the wolves are showing up or whatever. And that section ended with some amazing writing, where all of it, multiple portions of that writing area, seemed like they could have been the end of that section, or even truly, and you brought this up, I thought it as well, but I don't know if you want to say
the end of a story.
It just could have been that culminating moment for an entire story. It was just so well done. And so I wrote down some of some of the sections. So
I mean, realistically, the Olivia section and the werewolf section should just be two separate stories.
Okay.
Because I remember saying that after the Olivia section as well. Like, oh, okay, this could be the end of the story. And
right.
It would be good. It would be a good standalone story.
Right. It was very short, obviously, but otherwise, yes, I absolutely get your point, clearly.
And they're so different.
Yes. Well, that's why I said I almost forgot about it.
Right.
By the time we got to the end.
There's kind of no reason it is one story aside from the length. So they had to tack it on. But
well, and the fact that next week is the finale and they wanted to give you that foreshadowing moment. Right. So, well, next week. Again, the next story that is released is the finale. I'm saying they wouldn't
have written it. I'm saying it would have been two separate stories. Right. As opposed to being one story. Yeah. And again, the length is what made it so that they had to make it one story instead of two. Yeah.
So some of the lines at the end of that section were like when the Gatewatch is like getting ready to do this thing, Teferi yells out, you know, which is the Dawnheart Coven, he bellows. Let's get this ritual started. That could be an end, because you're like, oh, stuff's going down. Okay, cool. And so
if you're watching that as a TV show, right? That's like where the commercial break comes in.
100%.
Or it's the end of the episode.
100%.
Teferi yelling.
Cliffhanger, yeah. Yeah.
You know, let's get this ritual started.
Right. And yet,
end of episode.
And yet that's one line. The next line, or two lines down, it says, this time, when he being Teferi, her being Arlen for this time, when he looks at her, she knows she can't waste this borrowed time. Amazing.
Yeah.
Also really good. Also could be the end of the story, the end of that section.
Right. Or that's like what the narrator says as it's like fading out of the episode.
Hell yeah. And yet, it's still not. Then, her dreams, again, her being Arlen, her dreams are dying by the second, as are the last rays of the last sunset on Innistrad. Amazing.
That's another one where it's like the narrator saying that as you're
panning out. Yeah. And that's not the end of that section, nor is it the end of the story. But it could have been 100%.
There were like these lines are end of story lines.
There were like 3 or 4. And honestly, and not even to be rude, the last line of that section is arguably the weakest of all of them in terms of an ending line. And yet, still fine that it's there, right? It's just... But yes, it ends with...
Well, I guess because it kind of has to be more of a bridge at that point.
I guess.
To the fact that there's still more story after that.
No, that's a very good point. Because the last line is, she has to do what she can. Again, in my opinion, arguably the weakest of all of them to end the section, but I actually really like that point. I hadn't thought of that. That does really bridge it into... Keep reading, there's more story, like...
Like if you're going to put 3 end of episode lines in a row...
Yeah.
And it's not technically the end of the episode, like you gotta put an extra little bit in there to take you into the rest of the story.
Oh yeah.
To work it back in.
Yeah. Okay, and so then we move on to what you wanted to talk about, what we both wanted to really talk about, obviously. But you are more than welcome. Do you want to just start with the quote? Do you want to like preface it in any way?
I'll start with the quote. It just says, she runs from the memory. But memory is...
A fine
hunter.
Sorry, my handwriting's bad.
The blood on her hands has never truly gone away. Oh, there was a...
There's the ellipses. Yeah. There were lines in between those, but yeah.
Basically, the whole second half of this story... is perfect for the trauma through line that I talk about in these episodes every episode.
Which, by the way, the playlist should be linked for you at the end, which should pop up here. Go watch the other videos if you haven't seen them yet.
Exciting and so needed after the last story, which basically didn't even touch on it at all.
Yeah. Right, because even the side stories that we've been discussing and have had those moments in them.
But there's so much to the last half of this story that applies to this through line that I literally can't even talk about it. Just read the story. Yeah. It's so amazing. It's such an accurate depiction of what it means to have PTSD, what it means to have been abused by somebody, controlled by somebody, searching for your own self, right? Because you've been forced your whole life to not truly be the self that you want to be, right? So these are just the 2 lines that I had him write because they were the first 2 that touched on it. And then after that, I didn't have him write any of the stuff down because his arm would have fallen off.
We would have run through this whole legal pad.
Yeah. So like, basically, I'll just try to explain what those 2 lines meant. She runs from the memory. So it's so hard to explain, but when somebody has sort of an event, as I guess you could describe it, based on it being a trigger of a memory, right? So when people say stuff is triggering, that's what they mean, right? It's triggering a memory. And when a memory is triggered, you're in that memory. So you're experiencing it as if it is happening now. So she runs from the memory is like a really nice depiction of like how people dissociate and do all kinds of distracting things, stay super busy, do drugs, drink, whatever it is that they do to avoid facing the things that have caused their trauma.
But
and then but memory is a fine hunter, right? It always keeps coming back because until you do the work to let that memory no longer control you, and actually from a physical standpoint move it from one side of your brain to the other side of your brain, essentially, from where it's currently being stored to where you want it to be stored. It always finds its way back. You avoid it and avoid it and avoid it, it will always come back until you can figure out how to work through it.
Well, and especially because from my more limited understanding, and so I'll preface it by saying that, there are certain things that someone could know. You know what? If and when this occurs, that will always trigger me, or it has always triggered me. But it could be something that you've never thought of before, that's never happened to you before. Maybe somebody says a greeting to you, but it's the greeting that your abuser always greeted you with. And so that pops you back in. Like something that you would never think of. It's perfectly innocuous to the person that said it to you, but to you, it has that effect, but you've never experienced it before. So how would you know? You're not, as you discussed, you're not currently like drinking it away or whatever. You're just trying to go about your daily life. and you're reminded of it regardless. It's a hunter. It finds you no matter where you are and no matter what you're doing. So that's what I think of.
It will. It's not a, well, sometimes this happens, right? It will find you.
Yeah. And Arlen even talked about, or the story mentioned, that when Arlen was running, and there's all the blood of the humans, her running in the blood of the humans at the festival was her running in Tovalar's blood the night that she left him after attacking him, or him attacking her, or whatever the case may be.
Right, and they described it in such a way where it really was. She was experiencing that memory as if it was occurring at the moment
that very second
she was living, right? But it wasn't.
No. And that's why, again, like I'll reiterate what Amy said. Definitely go read it, because we're not going to be able to cover all these points, but it's so good.
Need to.
So good.
And there's so much to it. It's just so all-encompassing of descriptions of all of these things that a lot of other properties in the past have really fallen short of being able to depict in a realistic manner. So this is a story I'm ecstatic exists.
Yeah, very good.
And I'm proud that I read it.
It's very, I mean, again, just excellent. All the way around, excellent. So if you've read the story for yourself, do you have a particular moment that maybe before coming here, right? Especially if you've watched the other ones and you knew that Amy was focusing on that through line of trauma.
Right, because I always do.
But is there something that stood out to you that you wanted to come here and you hoped that we would talk about? Maybe we didn't, or maybe Amy didn't, because there was too much.
Right.
But if so, what was it? Let us know in the comments.
What are those lines that really stood out to you? If you were listening to Joe read the story, which quotes would you have had him write down?
That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah, I like that.
Write those in the comments and then say why.
Yeah.
You don't have to go like super into detail with your own trauma experience if you don't feel comfortable doing so, of course.
Right.
But I am always open and happy to hear about whatever it is that you guys want to say on this subject.
Correct.
Truly.
Yeah. And then, as long as it's okay with you, I didn't necessarily want to just end on that note.
Well, I wanted to talk about the blood a little bit.
Oh, yes, the blood. Sure.
The blood on her hands has never truly gone away. A lot of times with stuff like that, they talk about shame or guilt, things like that.
She had a lot of that, yeah.
So she had a lot of guilt. And, you know, walking through all that blood, seeing all the deaths, that's a lot of shame, a lot of disappointment in herself, right? And these are all things that are very, very closely tied to basically everything that's in the second half of the story, and everything that is trauma or PTSD or even probably frequently any mental health issues. So I just wanted to mention that a little bit as well.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, okay. Like I said, I didn't necessarily want to end on that note, and it's not for disrespecting your points or anyone that's gone through any of that, but just, you know, wanted to kind of bookend it because that was our big point that we wanted to talk about here. But one other thing that I wanted to discuss was this story talked about or mentioned Teferi slowing the sunset, right? It happened in this story. I don't think this is a negative because I think that this story was amazing. We've said that many times. When I looked at the cards, story spotlight or otherwise, Teferi slowing the sunset seemed so interesting to me. Mm-hmm. Where I was like, wow, I can't wait to read about that. And this story really glossed over it.
Yeah.
I wrote here, and Amy can see that I wrote this here, I don't know if I needed full explanations of like what Teferi was thinking, what he was feeling, what it was like for him, etc. it was kind of alluded to through Arlen's interpretations of Teferi's movements and phrases and etc. to say, hey, this is really difficult for him, right? He can't keep this up forever.
Right, and I have a lot I have to do in this period of time that he's creating.
Yeah, she was a little busy.
Yeah.
One, that she needed to try to get all this done because he was exerting himself for her, but also it was then harder for her to focus on what he was doing to be able to explain it to us as the readers.
Right. And
since it was her perspective.
Fighting Tovalar and everything
Exactly.
else.
But I had those expectations when I saw those cards, and I don't feel like those expectations were met.
Yeah, it really would have been cool if they had, like, taken us to his perspective as well.
Right. Even for like a paragraph or two.
Right.
Sure.
Or just a couple of lines, something.
Yeah.
That was what that experience was like for him from his perspective.
Yeah, or even, because, I mean, I can imagine it here, and I'm not the author, and I'm not saying that I think that this is how they should do it, or should have done it. But what if they had done something like, you know, when it starts, you cut to Teferi's perspective to discuss him starting the ritual, shoving his staff in the ground, what that feels like. And then cut away, go to Arlen for a little while and her fight with Tovalar, then cut back to Teferi with him like straining and straining and straining and then doing it as hard as long as he can, and then he's got to give it up, right? He's got to stop. And what that means, and then cut back to Arlen, who eventually gets to that moment of like, oh, the sun is going further down, like the rays are disappearing, okay, now it's gone.
Right.
And so, again, I don't think that's a negative necessarily, but I would love people's thoughts of, did you feel similarly to me? Were you waiting on Teferi slowing the sunset? Did it meet your expectations? Did it leave you hanging a little bit and wishing for that there was more given to you? Or am I alone in that? Did you think that, no, Joe, you were right, this story is perfect on its own, it was cool that it just glossed over it, let it be what it is? I'm fine either way, I just am curious what other people have to say.
I think that the story is spectacular. Exactly the way that it is.
I agree.
But I do agree that it would be cool if there was that extra component.
And I will say, it is technically possible that the beginning of story 5, the final story, has Teferi's perspective kind of at the end there. So I will reserve, if I'm wrong, like because these stories have been out for a bit now, so if people have read that, you're welcome to say in the comments like, hey Joe, go check out the beginning of story 5. That's fine, because we haven't read that yet, we haven't recorded it yet, but so I'm more than happy to be proven wrong, and I'll say that in the next episode if I have to. But yeah,
I think you would be happier to be proven wrong, because then that piece of the story that you want to exist would exist.
Correct. So yeah, again, great story. We think you should go read it, but
read it.
Yes, we want any opinions that you have. Maybe you didn't like this story. You are more than entitled to that feeling despite what both of us have said, and we would still love to hear from you. We're not getting into any arguments, but we would love to, we're not looking to argue with anybody. If you disagree with our assessment, we would love to hear you. As always, that's what the comments down below are for. Yes. Please let us know your thoughts, as always.
Maybe you think it doesn't depict a very realistic version of PTSD.
Sure.
I would love to know why you feel that way.
Sure.
Because I feel the opposite way. So I want to know what you know.
Yeah. Hearing other perspectives is always helpful to us,
right.
I think. But yeah, as I mentioned, we will be back next week with side story, I believe it's number 4, but I guess I could technically look back in my book here and find out. Side story number 4. Yeah, side story number 4 will be next week, followed by main story number 5, the finale, and then side story number 5, which oddly enough, I checked our calendar, and I think I'm correct in my math here, or my counting. That final Innistrad Midnight Hunt story review will be on the night before Crimson Vows pre-release. So that should be awesome. I'm looking forward to it. Definitely stay tuned to this channel for more of this series, for any of our series that we have coming out on this channel, Video Games for All, Gluten Free for All. Go ahead.
You did also say, funnily enough, at the beginning, before you read this story, that tonight is a full moon.
Tonight is the night of a full moon, Wednesday, the night that we're filming this. So this will come out Thursday, but the day before is when we're filming it, and it is the night of a full moon. So very interesting.
Yeah, so very appropriate for the story that we've read.
Oh yeah, love it. So thank you all so very much for being here. I really hope everybody enjoyed the video. As always, commenting down below, as we mentioned, we want the conversation to keep going. It helps us out with the YouTube algorithm nonsense, but that's not why we're asking for it. It's truly not. We want to hear from you.
Care.
Yeah, exactly. We want to hear from you. We want the conversation to keep going. If you want to help us out, though, liking and sharing helps out a lot. As I mentioned earlier, subscribing and ringing that bell, that's helpful to us, but also helpful to you, so we do appreciate it. And hey, don't forget, if you're reading these stories and you're comparing them to real-life traumas, or looking at Arlen and actually feeling bad for the situations that she fictionally went through, that's an amazing way for all of you to join us in showing off our
Hashtag Vorthos Pride.
That's right. We will be back next week with more. As I said, thank you for joining us as always. I don't really know what else to say, so I'm just going so I'm just going to end the video here for now. From us here at the Geek for All family of channels, I have been Joe.
And I'm Amy.
And as we always say, in whichever video of ours you watch next, we will see you all